myself and a woman named Ashley Glukowski, who's a researcher in the UK, just authored an editorial for the American College of Sports Medicine on muscle power for older people, with the recognition that, for a long time, and myself included, we focused a lot on strength, and we said that was important. The reality is that the better, it appears, predictor of morbidity and even mortality is muscle power. And so the ability to generate force and to do it quickly. So everybody, I talk about muscle power, then people go, oh, like you should never power train older people. And we now have actually probably about 2 or 3 decades worth of data showing that actually power training in older people is very safe.
Hello, Dr. Phillips. You are a professor of kinesiology at McMaster University, where you research, among other topics, exercise physiology and gerontology. So welcome to Modern Healthspan, and thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here, Richard. Thanks for having me.
So thank you. So Dr. Phillips, your two specializations, kind of exercise and gerontology, fit so well with what we want to talk about and the channel in general. So it's great to have you on today. So
Awesome.
During today's talk, I'd like to keep in mind a couple of personas that I kind of see from my comments and would probably fit with people that I've kind of talked to. So one of them is like a semi-serious older adult, and maybe they're retired, but they're spending most of they spend a reasonable amount of time exercising. So
Sure.
how can they make the most of that?
Yeah.
And then I think another kind of group of people would be someone who has not so much experience. They may not have that much time. And what they're really looking for is minimum effective dose. But both of these are older. So we're talking about older adults. But
Yeah.
minimum effective dose, what is it that I can do to get an optimal health span? I'm not looking to run marathons or anything, but
Right.
yeah, that's kind of okay.
Yeah, so I think there are some truisms with those types of personas. I mean, there are some people out there that use the case of masters athletes as an example. Most of them masters runners or cyclists or something that, seem to age particularly well as, these are the people to who we should compare ourselves. And, they're the optimal agers. They might not actually be the best agers. They're pretty good. But the person who is sort of serious about exercise, I mean, I think that the message back is, first of all, in my opinion anyway, you've dialed in what I think is the key activity to healthy, successful aging and good health span. I'm fond of saying that, cardiorespiratory fitness, so heart, lung fitness, will keep you out of the doctor's office. And, that's where we know all these chronic conditions that lower our quality of life are going to come from. And so, the more that you do of that, the better off you are. I think the more recent revelation has been the importance of muscle and strength. And I know we're going to talk about muscle power as well, as what I call not just adding years to your life, but adding life to your years. So, there aren't too many masters lifters, mostly because if you lifted early in life and you keep lifting, you're probably not doing it later in life. But people who discover that being a little bit stronger in life is, better as you get older. The folks I call the mere mortals, you're time pressured. I'm not really sure about exercise. Probably need to hear the message that, for most people, first, it's never too late to start. And I think that, it sounds trite, but it's completely true. And that the biggest reduction in risk we get from every and any chronic health condition is when we take someone who's not exercising to starting to exercise. That's the really big reduction in risk or the really sharp rise in benefits. And so even doing something as little as, 20 minutes a day of walking where you didn't before, has some pretty profound benefits in terms of not just physical health, but also mental health, we're beginning to realize as well. So, you know, everybody wins. It's just a question of where you are on the curve. And, as somebody who likes to exercise just about every day, I'd say I'm probably more on the serious end, but, I have lots of friends who are, tell me about this exercise. What's the least amount I can do? And we know that benefits begin to happen well before the 150 minutes a week, which people think, how am I ever going to do that? And the answer is you don't have to, but just realize that that's probably a sweet spot.
Yes. So the 80-20 rule, and you can make
Yes.
a. So if we thought about, so why do you do exercise? And so what metrics should we aim for? So how do we measure how we progress? I mean, I could measure like how big my bicep was, but that wouldn't be such
Sure.
a useful metric. So what are the metrics that we know are correlated with with all-cause mortality, or not correlated, in fact? And which are the most important ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're, from the cardiovascular or cardiorespiratory side, there's one that sort of, is top of the heap, and that's your peak VO2 or your peak oxygen uptake. And there's a little bit of maybe misunderstanding about, what that metric is, but in my view, and the way I sort of deconstruct it for people, and the reason why I tell people that it's so ridiculously good and well correlated with, morbidity, so all kinds of disease symptoms and severity, but mortality as well, is it's the functioning of your brain being able to transmit signals through your nerves to coordinate the actions of your muscles to exert themselves to their maximum capacity. And so your muscles need to be in good shape, but so does your brain and your nerves. And then it requires the coordination of your heart to pump blood and your lungs to breathe, and you take them to their ceiling. So if you like the sports car analogy, it's really, taking the car up to top gear and seeing where the red line is. And that's always where, that's a true stress test. And, that's what we call, cardiopulmonary exercise testing for our cardiac rehab patients. And the clinic is two floors down from where I am right now. And, that's a stress test. And so when we stress the system, we have a good sense of where its ceiling is. And the ceiling is going to come down. Like aging wins. And I'd love to come on here and tell you we know how to turn the clock back. Well, all we know how to do is to, do it well or not well. So VO2 peak or maximum oxygen uptake is essentially like riding up a hill or running up a hill or whatever you want to say, to the point where you're like, I'm done. Like I can't do it anymore. That's a number not a lot of people would know, and I would freely admit that. But there are a variety of tests that are out there on the internet where you can go and for free, you can essentially put yourself through a sort of a pseudo VO2 max test and get an idea of where your ceiling is. And the higher your ceiling, the better off you are. And the way to preserve your ceiling is occasionally to do some exercise that pushes that outer envelope. The strength end of things is a little different, and we could talk about lots of sort of functional tests. I don't know that there's one that's, the best that's out there. I mean, hand grip strength is the one most people point to. I think it's good because we have a lot of data, and so we've got a lot of data points, and we can look at associations. But muscle power is probably a little bit better, and we don't have a standard metric for that. But let me put it to you in sort of a test most people would understand that at some point in your life, the biggest test that you're going to do is to be able to get up out of a chair. And I'm not talking about using your hands to push on, but actually just stand up and use your leg power. And that's strength compressed into a short period of time. And when you can't do that, you're probably in full-time institutionalized care or you're reliant on somebody else for a number of other things. So, if you can do those things and do them well, those are the metrics that we scientists would point to say you're in good shape. Getting across an intersection, doing it relatively rapidly is another one to be able to avoid the cars. But those are the sort of key metrics that are out there.
So the sit to stand test, could you
Yeah.
do that to estimate your power?
Yeah, I mean, there's a standard sit to stand test where we get people to sit in a chair, they cross their arms across their chest, and they just push themselves up out of a chair. Now, you can imagine some older people or even some, well, younger people with certain diseases or conditions or maybe who have been on a period of bed rest or muscle disuse for whatever reason, uh, actually wouldn't be able to do one sit to stand test. We do it 5 times and we time how long it takes people to do it. The idea is for it not to be a race, but essentially just a standard push up and out of the chair. And it really relies on your quadriceps and so the four muscles across the top of the front of your thighs. And everybody goes, "Oh, it's a measure of strength." And I'm like, actually, it's a measure of power. And your time to do 5 sit to stand tests is a very good predictor of a lot of things that could happen or could not happen later in life.
So, how about body composition? So, do I want
Mm.
to work for like lean tissue or strength?
Yeah, both.
Well, that's
Or the answer, as most scientists, frustratingly like to give to interesting questions are it depends. I mean, I think that, if I had one to pick, that if, and a lot of people reach out to me on social media and say, like, I'm really worried about my muscle. I've got a scale that I stand on, or I've got a test that I do at a gym, and I just can't put on muscle mass. And my answer back is always, well, how's your function? Like what can you do in your daily life? Is there anything in your daily life that you can't do that you wish you could? And most they go, oh no, I'm fine. And I'm like, well, that's really the test that I think is most important. We use what we call 3 tenses of movement when we talk to people. We ask them to self-evaluate what their activity level is. We bring them into the lab and we test them, or we give them, a Fitbit or an Aura ring or something, and we see how much they can do. When you sort of compound all of those things, what it really means is, what are you doing in your daily life? And if there are no limitations to it, uh, then you're in good shape. Now, clearly, in your 40s and 50s, hopefully there's no limitations. But, as you get older in life, these are the sorts of things you begin to realize, I can't do that anymore. And if that's something that's a key and critical or core part of your day, then it's time to work on your strength and power. I could care less whether your lean mass changed. And I know I'll probably lose some friends in saying that, but I think the enemy of good is perfection, right? And you don't need to have both, but function is the key part. I mean, that's the metric that I would hope that everybody would have later in life for sure.
so. One other question in this area. So, is VO2 max and strength and power are they independent? Are they additive? I mean, has anyone tested?
Yeah. So they tend to be, it's the old adage that you get good at what you do, right? So practice a lot of tests that take you to the top gear. And so, riding, running, walking, whatever it is up a really steep hill, you're going to get better at doing that. So you'll improve your VO2 max or your maximum oxygen uptake. So that's the brain muscle, heart lung capacity issue. And then at the same time, if I practice lifting weights and I practice moving weights relatively rapidly to develop power, that's what I get better at doing. And so the two tend to sort of move independently. And of course, the guidelines, when you look at the WHO or anywhere in the world, probably about the same 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous aerobic. The sort of sub note of a lot of the guidelines, the part that most people aren't familiar with is 2 days a week of strengthening work. And that's not necessarily going to the gym and lifting weights, although if it is, great for you, but something that makes you stronger. And from that standpoint, they do tend to sort of, they're not necessarily related, but for older people that we find who come into our research lab volunteer for studies, and we find these people in their mid 70s, sometimes their 80s. They don't take any medication. They're ridiculously good shape. They sort of look metabolically like they're in their 30s and 40s. So this is where everybody's looking for, right? That's true health span. And we give them a pedometer, or we ask them what they do, and they're generally very physically active. Never have we found somebody like that that isn't doing something that you go, oh, okay, there's a reason for these things. So, that's somebody who does probably all of those things. They swim, they bike, they run, they walk. They've got 5 dogs or something like that. So they're taking the dogs for a walk twice a day and something like that.
It's surprising how little we discuss the potential effects of Wi Fi, 5G, and Bluetooth on our bodies. These EMF signals are everywhere, and research suggests that EMFs may open calcium channels in our cells, letting calcium flood in and putting our cells under constant stress. This is where magnesium comes in. It helps close the channels to keep calcium in check. But most of us don't get enough magnesium. And when your body is constantly bombarded by EMFs, your magnesium burn rate skyrockets. And most supplements only use one or two basic forms that your body can't absorb well. That's why I use Magnesium Breakthrough from Bioptimizers. It's the only one with all 7 essential forms of magnesium designed for real absorption, so I can sleep better and stay calm and balanced. If you want to try Magnesium Breakthrough, go to bioptimizers.com/modern and use code MODERN10 to save 10%. They offer a full 365-day money-back guarantee. And if you subscribe, you will get amazing discounts and free gifts. Okay, so we want to build muscle. So there are these different elements to what it is we want to achieve. But I think I want to talk about muscle building today. I mean, VO2
Sure.
max is kind of another thing, and
Yep.
we could spend hours on that.
We could. That could be a whole podcast, and yeah, you could
Yeah.
still probably debate and rage about it for sure.
Yes. Okay. So we're looking at resistance training.
Yeah.
Um, and so we want to do so. Yeah. Well, what should our resistance training look like in terms of like how often per week, how many,
Yeah.
like how many reps, how much one
Yeah.
RM? Yeah.
Yeah. It's complicated, right? And I'm fond of saying is, I have a colleague and good friend 2 doors down named Dr. Martin Gavala, and he's a big advocate of high intensity interval training as a way time efficient, improve and maintain your VO2 max. And he and I actually created it's an online open course. I'll mention it because it costs zero money to take it. So it's called Hacking Exercise for Health, and it's hosted on the Coursera platform, where we sort of jokingly take the whole idea. It's like Marty's the cardiorespiratory fitness guy and I'm the muscle guy, and which is better. And so we both take our own journeys and then eventually come back and obviously say, well, you need both. Um, but the tough part about resistance training is that most people believe you have to go to a gym, and you don't. Most people believe it needs to be heavy weights, and heavy is always relative. But my point is we've demonstrated now time and time again that actually lighter weights, as long as they're lifted to the point where you get a fairly good sort of, I'll call it, sense of effort about doing what the work that you do, are just as effective as heavy weights. So, the message is first, it doesn't have to be something you do in a gym. Body weight work is just as effective. It could be lighter weights that you have around the house that are easy for everybody to obtain, or even resistance bands. These used to be TheraBands that people had to hold with the grip. Those were challenging for some people, but now there are sets of bands that have grips that come on the end. Probably costs you around $50. I'll just call it generic dollars, Canadian, American, Australian, whatever, to buy a good set that you could use, and you're just exerting yourself to the point where the resistance is essentially becoming challenging to your muscle. And the reps that you do, I think anywhere between 8 to about 20 is a range where at the end of the 8 or the end of the 20, you should feel like that's tough. So if I'm looking at a scale, it's about an 8 or a 9 out of 10. I don't need everybody to go to failure, or, the idea of, you're pushing a bar and you're like, I can't get this off my chest. I need a spotter. Not everybody needs to be there, but something where you exert yourself twice a week. the guidelines probably have it about right is the type of dose that we're looking to for people to do. And it's not all upper body stuff, although that's what I'm demonstrating, but clearly lower body stuff. I point out to people that 60% of their muscle is always below their belt. And so it's your thighs, it's your hamstrings, it's your gluteals. And those are actually the muscles that you want to hang on to as you get older, to be honest with you. Not that grip strength isn't awesome, but it's a proxy marker for everything else that we have. It's just so easy to test. In a doctor's office, everybody can do a grip strength test, but not everybody can do, an instantaneous power test, which we can do in the lab, for example.
If I'm doing HIT, just out of interest, so if I'm doing
Sure.
HIT, right, I'm doing my sprint like a 4x4,
Yeah.
like my
Yeah.
legs are tired.
Yes.
Does that help me build muscle?
Yeah, no, it doesn't actually, but it helps you hang on to muscle. So it's an interesting sort of difference, right? I think as the stimulus goes, it's certainly, if you looked at people who are sprinters, their muscle mass would sort of decline with age normally. But the difference would be is that their curve would be like this, and somebody who doesn't sprint, their curve would be a little steeper. But somebody who lifted weights, the curve would be even flatter still. And so it does help, but it's certainly not as effective as some resistive stimulus or a loading stimulus if you were to do, a leg press on a machine or free weights or something like that. So it helps, and it's great for cardiovascular exercise. And remember that HIT is, that's the sprinting end of things. And a lot of people choose not to do that, which is fine. But walking or even sort of slower jogging or running, similarly would be, somewhere on the curve where it would change the trajectory from somebody who's sedentary, but less effective than something that's a loading exercise or something where you fatigue relatively quickly due to load. But hit works for sure.
How much? So you kind of mentioned that it may not help you build muscle, but it would
Right.
stop. So how much harder is it to build compared to maintain, to increase your muscle? Because my understanding
Yeah,
is like muscle is constantly turning over, right?
it is.
Some is getting better,
Yeah.
but it still seems like it has a set point, and like making it go above that set point is harder. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a lot of things, I'm fond of pointing out to people that, drug companies and pharma have known for, decades, that you give somebody a drug to lower blood pressure. There are people who get a great effect, systolic and diastolic drop by 20 millimeters, and it's like awesome. And then some people get a moderate effect, they get 10 and 10. Some people, blood pressure doesn't change, and some people, bizarrely, their blood pressure might go up a little bit. Not too many of those people, but this, what we call response variability to drugs is, it's really well established, and that's just a genetic phenomenon that humans are, what we call an outbred species. We tend to, you know, go in different directions and have different partners, and so our gene pool is sort of getting more and more dilute. Um, but it's the same in response to exercise. So nobody should be surprised that there are some people who are good sprinters, and not everybody will be a good sprinter. Just like there are some people who will be what we call, easy gainers or big gainers, and people that are hard gainers and just don't gain muscle. Everybody, though, when they practice resistance exercise, will get stronger. But as you say, some people experience lots of benefit. Some people, they don't really budge the needle. But everybody gets stronger. And so, hence my message that it's the strength and then the associated power that goes along with that that's more important than muscle. But it seems to me that based on data that we have that's sort of cross-sectional, people can build muscle probably into their 70s, even their 80s for a short period of time. But eventually age is going to win. So the big question is, when does muscle loss begin in earnest? For most people, it probably starts in their 30s. And I know that's not a great message, but for a lot of people, it's not measurable until their 50s. And so you can put it off and delay it. I think at some point the curve does begin to tip, and it's just, this is normal aging. The difference, and we like to make this point, is that the small difference in trajectory of that curve of even 1 or 2 degrees at an early time in life has a big effect because the two curves diverge later in life and you hit a muscle mass or a strength or a power or a VO2 peak, as the case may be, that's going to limit you. And the difference was later in life could be as many as, it could be a decade. And if that decade is, between 75 and 85 or 85 and 95, that's a massive difference in quality of life and, disease risk and lots of other things. So to the health span point, that's really the crux of what we're talking about. But some people are good at gaining muscle, and they tend to gravitate towards those activities earlier in life. Other people can run long distances and never get tired. Other people are just fast, and that's it. You remember those kids in school? Everybody had a race, and then you were like, "How is that kid? Well, why are they always fast?" And the next thing, it's like they're at the top of the heap in terms of cross country runners. They're being developed for this, that, and the other. And so it shouldn't surprise anybody that, the mere mortals who aren't quite at the top have a response variability that would be, okay, so, we're good at this, we're good at that. But the big message back is everybody still benefits on some dimension. And hopefully that's the one that you're trying to maximize. It doesn't always happen, though, I'll be honest.
So we talked about metrics, and we said power was an important metric.
Yeah.
So how do I do power training, and how do I do
Yeah.
it safely, especially as I'm
Yeah.
getting older?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great question, and I mentioned to you before we started here. Myself and a woman named Ashley Glukowski, who's a researcher in the UK, just authored an editorial for the American College of Sports Medicine on muscle power for older people, with the recognition that for a long time, and myself included, we focused a lot on strength, and we said that was important. The reality is that the better, it appears, predictor of morbidity and even mortality is muscle power. And so the ability to generate force and to do it quickly. So everybody, I talk about muscle power, then people go, oh, like you should never power train older people. And we now have actually probably about 2 or 3 decades worth of data showing that actually power training in older people is very safe. Where people I think get a bit confused is they look at an Olympic lifter throwing a big heavy weight over their head or pushing it up to here. And I'm like, that's power lifting for sure. But it's not the type of exercise that we're talking about. So where power is most effectively developed is to take loads that are actually quite a bit lighter than those individuals would try to move, and anybody who's out there and does Olympic lifting and like power to you, pardon the pun. Um, but for most people, it's a lighter weight and it's just about moving fast. And so we take, small medicine balls, for example, and we have people push them off their chest and throw them to each other, for example. Um, and nobody who's done that with the weight of the medicine balls that we have, like we start with something that's just a rubber ball, and it's about getting the velocity component. And it's the same thing, with leg stuff. So it's the standing action instead of, sort of loading up and trying this. It's about sort of trying to lean forward and move quickly out of a sitting maneuver. So all of these things don't require heavy weights at all. And it's about generating the velocity more than it is about generating it with the load on top. I would say that being stronger first, so doing some typical resistance training where you're using, heavier weights and maybe not focusing on the velocity is a key foundational piece before we would put anybody through a power program. But there are plenty of studies out there that have done power training in older adults without incident. I mean, it's not something that I think people can do right away, but it is something that can be trained. And like everything, you get better at doing what you practice. So it does pay dividends. And the exact reason for why that's better for you or more predictive, I'm not sure I could put my finger on it. But if you think about daily tasks that become important, and just because of the mobility issue in later life, it's power that's going to limit you. If you want to go up a flight of stairs and do it safely, that's a power maneuver. It's not, I mean, you could do it relatively slowly, one step at a time, but most people, when they're moving upstairs like that, choose to take the elevator or the lift. So but if you can still do it and you still rise through those stairs with each step, those are power maneuvers. It's strength in a short period of time to snap off that, you know, stair rise maneuver.
Could you, no, how would you combine the power and the strength? I mean, do they have to be done on different days? We said twice per week, so you'd have like
Yeah.
two strengths and one power, or how would
Yeah.
that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, this is where the art and the science of balancing this for people really comes in. I don't know that there's an exact formula. I do tend to get people when we train people in our facility downstairs, we train them in strength work first, and that's the foundational piece, and then we begin to practice power type maneuvers. In that sense, we generally say if you're into the facility twice a week, one day is a strength piece and then the other day is a power focus piece. And just realizes that sometimes one sort of steals from the other. So you might find, oh, I'm getting stronger. And then you back off of this and then you get more powerful, but maybe your strength goes down a little bit. And everybody gets a little bit worried about that. And I try to point out to most people, I'm like, look, you're doing something that's so good for you. That not a lot of other people are doing is that these sorts of, relative differences and squeezing the last piece, the last drop out of the cloth to your 80-20 rule, which I love. I love that you said that because you don't know how many students have sat in my office here and I've explained that principle to them and they sort of, I think they're quite young, they kind of glaze over and then later they get back to me and they say, you remember that 80-20 thing you talked about? That's so true. And I'm like, there you go. And again, the enemy of good is perfection, right? You don't need to be the person that squeezes the last drop out, but just realizes that, sometimes working strength and power and doing them independently. We do them on different days is the short answer. But some coaches like to work, power and strength work. Some people like strength over, and there's all kinds of ways of doing it. There's no wrong way unless it's something that's aggravating an injury that you have or creating pain. And pain, as much as we hate it, it's a signal that something's being overstressed, and so time to back off and take a rest.
So one thing I think we don't talk about much is recovery.
Mm,
So
yeah.
especially when we get old, right? So it's harder to build muscle. So
Older. I always say
older,
older, never old,
older,
older.
never old, older. Yes. What are the things we need to do to optimize our recovery?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Recovery is like the forgotten variable in programming, right? It's almost like a lot of coaches focus on, this is the program, this is the design. And the point I make to, athletes when I talk to some of the younger folks and then obviously older people is all the good stuff actually happens once you stop exercising and you recover. And you pointed out earlier, and you're spot on about the remodeling of muscle. It's constantly being turned over. So we're making it, but we're breaking it down. And it's that turnover that, I mean, that's great, right? It's actually putting new bricks into the wall and taking old bad bricks out, and the wall stays in great shape. But the recovery aspect, and I generally like to simplify things. And when I talk to athletes, I use the same message. The first is there are three R's in recovery: rehydration. So if you sweat, and our climate is we're experiencing a hot summer right now. I'm in the northern hemisphere, but I mean, in hot weather, you've got to rehydrate. You'll feel adverse events if you don't refuel, and the fueling of muscle for it to do work is generally carbohydrate based, and repair. And the repair part is protein. So then you climb into a big part of my world, which is talking about protein recommendations. But trying to get those things on board as quickly and as soon as possible afterwards without stressing too much, because there was a great emphasis on the timing of those nutrients for a long period of time. And what we realize now actually is the window for getting all of that nutrition, with the exception of the hydration, is open for a very long time. So even for a day. But it's regular food. It doesn't need to be supplements, but those are the aspects of recovery, as well as obviously rest. And so, it could be relative rest. So if you did something with your upper body on Monday and something with your lower body on Tuesday, your upper body is recovering because you're not using it. But if you're walking every day, or running every day, or cycling every day, or lifting 3 or 4 days a week, then you need to pay closer attention to, because your recovery periods are much shorter, the type of nutrition that you follow and the types of regimes that you have to really cover those 3 R's. And then there are other things that we could add on top. We could talk about creatine. We could talk about lots of different supplements that might enhance recovery. If people are interested in those, I think it gets a little bit more nuanced. And to me, and I like to deal more in sort of broad strokes, big picture stuff. It's really about carbohydrates and protein and recovery, and worrying about supplements. I'm like, to me, that's a little bit of the squeezing the cloth a little bit, but they're out there.
Do you think, did you see, just very briefly, do you see something like red light, sauna, cold therapy? Do any of these help? Or do you
Yeah,
use any of them?
yeah. So I'm pragmatic about talking about, red light therapy, cold water immersion, and lots of other things. I mean, I think that being at McMaster now for 28 years, and I've seen a lot of things come and go. More things come and go than come and stay. I think, if I had money to bet, that 5 years from now, we won't be talking about cold water immersion as some savior or something that's going to delay aging or enhance recovery. If anything, actually, it may even delay recovery because of the effect that it has in constricting small blood vessels that are necessary to bring blood for repair and remodeling. A lot of those things I see as fad-ish. Lots of people will then tell me, this stuff, I do it, I feel great, it works for me. And my answer is always like, drink up. Like if it works for you, then by all means do it. But for most people, I don't think that those are big deals. So the big picture, broad stroke, is do the activity, recover to the extent that's possible, that you're not sustaining an injury or developing pain in the long term. Sleep is great. I'm not a great sleeper, but I've learned through my wife's work, actually, who's a cardiovascular physiologist, the effects that shortened sleep and restricted sleep have on cardiovascular health. And I think there's now a revolution in understanding about how important sleep is. And that's another aspect of recovery. And then it's nutrition. And nutrition, you can blow that topic up, and you can get really deep into it. But it really is broad stroke stuffs around, foods that have good carbohydrate content, high quality proteins, and nourish you in other ways as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about nutrition.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, protein.
Yeah.
How much protein for as we get older?
Yeah.
Um, and you say high quality. Does it matter, animal or plant?
Yeah. So let's do the quantity one first. I mean, everywhere you go, sort of just about anywhere in the world, there's in North America, we call it the recommended dietary allowance, or the RDA, the recommended nutrient intake. It has various sort of definitions around the world, but it generally hovers around zero point 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And that's per kilogram of body weight. It's not ideal body weight. It's not lean mass. It's just body weight. Um, I think that's too low. Myself and another group of scientists, we've been advocating, particularly as people get older, that they should be increasing their protein intake, mainly to support muscle mass, as they get older. And so it probably could be as high as double that. So about 1.6 grams per kilogram per day. And, for anybody that deals in pounds, that's about zero point 0.7 grams per pound. I think beyond 1.6, it's really hard for somebody to justify, particularly with evidence, why they would advocate for protein intakes that are higher than that level. Lots of people do. They kind of cook up stories and they talk about all kinds of, I think, not particularly valid reasons, but we think up to about 1.6 is an intake that people should aim for. Most older people hit the zero point 0.8, no problems, but they don't hit the 1.6. So it requires a little bit of a shift in focus to sort of emphasize protein-based foods. And traditionally, on the animal-based side, those are, it's eggs, it's dairy, it's meat, chicken, fish, that sort of thing. The increasing knowledge around the environmental impact that animal-based proteins might have, that health effects of plant-based proteins may be better than animal-based proteins. People are asking about plant-based proteins, and it's something that I've had to change my opinion, and not just opinion, but based on evidence around. So when I first started, it was very clear plant-based proteins were, and I, use inferior in inverted commas to animal-based proteins. And by inferior, meaning that they had a different quality score. And the quality score is comprised of their digestibility, their less digestible plant-based proteins, and their what we call amino acid scores. So their essential amino acids, the building blocks of protein, were lower in plant-based proteins. And I was like 20 years ago, I was like, yep, animal-based proteins, higher quality. Those are the ones you should emphasize and everything. Time marches on. 10 years ago, I'm like, I don't know, I was beginning to see some work comparing plant to animal-based proteins. And I'm like, no, it's not as big a difference as I thought it would be. And then we've conducted some of our work, and I have, good friends and colleagues around the world who have done this work. And actually, I think the differences are much closer than we first thought. So let me just say that I don't think it's as big an issue, plant-based versus animal-based, as I once said it was. I know that upsets people because they're like, "Oh, you changed your mind," and I'm like, "Well, science is a changing process, and what kind of scientist would I be to ignore my own data?" But we find that they're far closer than they are different. From that standpoint, I think you do have to be a little bit more judicious about how you pick plant proteins versus animal proteins. So, just be aware of what the sources are, how much you're eating. Complementation, although some people would say it doesn't matter, I think it does. And the complementation means the grain and the legume pairing that I think should be in the same meal to be optimal. And a few things like that are quite nuanced, but that most people who are plant-based or plant-focused, and there's lots of definitions, people are flexitarian now, so they choose plants more often, which I think is a great choice, no problem. And from that standpoint, and I won't comment as much on the chronic health issues because I think that story is evolving, but there is some evidence to suggest that more plant-focused diets could be better for you from a cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes standpoint. I'm a fond user of the saying that exercise is the forgiver of many sins. And so maybe some of the more animal-focused issues aren't as big an issue when you account for physical activity. So
Okay. I mean, it sounds, as long as you're getting a whole food diet,
absolutely.
you don't really need to care about the amino acid mix or go into that kind of detail.
I think it matters less than I once thought. I think with Whole Foods, and when I tried to teach younger people and athlete groups how to shop, it's generally like grocery. One of my favorite activities when I travel is actually to visit a grocery store and say, "What does it look like?" And name the country where I am. And they seem to be this general pattern that around the outside of the grocery store is where the fruit and produce, or the fruit and veg is down one aisle, and then the sort of meat and dairy, and then there's the grains down another aisle. And all the foods that tend to typically be not so good for you are in the middle. And so I say, shop around the outside of the store, and Whole Foods, as you say, and you generally tend to you do fairly well. And everybody goes, well, but there's coffee in the middle. And I'm like, okay, well, never skip the coffee aisle for sure. But the point in the end is yeah, Whole Foods are really the way to do it. And it's not tricky. There's no message. But if there's a common enemy in the nutrition world, I do think that it's ultra processed foods, and we should cut down our consumption of those things. And they tend to be in the middle of the grocery store for sure.
Does the other macro matter too much, right? Where you get your calories from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have days where I think it matters and other days where I think where it doesn't, excuse me. I think you can probably find some people that are, I'll call them more sensitive to carbs, and the insulin effect. And maybe they should be consuming less carbohydrate. I don't do as much exercise or activity as I used to when I was younger. And so I tend to eat less carbohydrate, but I tend to eat less, period. That having been said, I think, really sort of glazing over and sort of trying to take a big step back and say big picture, I think it matters a whole lot less around the balance of those nutrients. And it is a little bit around, what tends to work for the individual. Because surely the hallmark of human evolution, the fact that we're still here, for as long as we have been, is our ability to adapt. And I think that there's a broad range of macronutrient intakes, which are probably generally, good for you, quote unquote, that you can do well on. Um, and the specifics around, low carb, high fat, or, combinations thereof are probably, in my mind, a little less important than the quality of the foods that comprise those ratios. And still, again, I layer over top the fact that, the more physically active you are, either through occupation as well, but, recreational or chosen physical activity or exercise, um, a lot of it begins to matter a whole lot less. And I know that that really grates against the nutrition only people. I have a foot in both worlds. I do nutrition work, and I do physical activity work. And I do think that the combination of those two things is the best of all of them. And so, people say it's hard to outrun a bad diet. And my trite reply back is it's hard to out nutrition being sedentary. So, and people go, well, from a weight loss standpoint, and I'm like, that's a myopic look at what nutrition is. It's not always just weight and energy balance. It's providing your body with the nutrients it needs. And I tend to say to people, you know what? Um, be physically active as you can, exercise, and, to the extent that you can and enjoy, and don't hurt yourself, eat well, um, but hopefully enjoy some food, right? I mean, I don't know what you think, but I think we tend to be focused on nutrients and nutrition, and we've forgotten a little aspect of sitting back and what it means to have good food, enjoy preparing good food, and sitting down with friends and enjoying a good meal. Because, that's the other part of life that, to me, if successful aging isn't sitting around with your friends and having a good time, I'm not sure what is. So, I think that's a big part of it.
It absolutely is. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, when you exercise, right, you burn glycogen in your muscle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does eating carbs replace that more quickly than doing it with fat? Do we know that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, carbs are the easily replaceable substrate. Fat actually doesn't replace carbohydrate at all. I mean, fat just puts fat back into adipose stores for the most part, or in muscle if that's where it needs to be stored. I think the message inside the low carb, high fat sort of mantra is that uh, carbohydrates release insulin, and insulin traps fat inside fat cells. Some people subscribe to that hypothesis, and I think that there are grains of truth around it. I don't think, however, it's the thing on which, the size of a fat cell and how much fat you have in your body, as an example, really hinges. But some people find, great effects in terms of, lower carb, higher fat, in terms of their macronutrient intake. And I'm always fond of saying, if that is how you want to run your life and how you like to eat, and it works for you, quote unquote, then so be it. But again, coming back to this human evolutionary message, surely at some point in human evolution, uh, that was a diet that we survived on, and because of food scarcity. But food scarcity isn't an issue. Well, that's not true. Food scarcity for most developed countries is not an issue anymore. Now it's the decision around, what you buy with your disposable food income dollar, and most people choose to buy ultra processed foods that are consumed within generally 5 minutes of buying them. So that's either fast food or something that you compress on a microwave, and generally higher sodium, higher saturated fat, contrived foods that have been, they don't exist in nature. They're just sort of stuck to glom together. And, you know, uh, fat and sugar are cheap. So they're easy to put into those foods. And I think that that's the conundrum, as opposed to, should I eat a relatively high fat diet versus a relatively high carbohydrate diet? There are nuances in there that are very important.
Mm. So one question on supplements, actually. I don't want to, but
Sure.
yeah. So I saw that you looked at urolithin A. Now,
Yes.
in terms of, I guess, protecting muscle when it was not moving.
Right.
Yeah. So would it help with sarcopenia, urolithin A?
Yeah. Look, the organization that markets urolithin A under the Timeline brand is banking on that as the core outcome of one of the supplements, right? Is that part of aging is a decline in an intracellular organelle, the mitochondria. uh, Urolithin promotes the what we call mitophagy, so actually sort of turning over of mitochondria and promoting then obviously that their message is mitochondrial health. Um, I think it could help. I think that there are some papers that those folks have produced that are impressive in terms of the outcome. Uh, I think it's lacking the big trial, the long-term clinical that we would like to see, that would make me sort of say broadly, yeah, I'd endorse this as a supplement. Um, I've got some inside knowledge, as you said, on the supplement that I can't quite share at the current time, but uh, there's something there that's going on. It's not quite on my supplement shelf yet, but it could be.
Cool. So I had like three questions, kind of quick fire
Yeah,
questions.
go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
Um, so in my exercise,
Yeah.
stick to the same protocol all the time so that it's safe and I'm doing the same. I'm exercise, it's I'm doing the same exercises and I can measure how I'm doing.
Yeah.
Or should I change it? How frequently?
Yeah, I'm an advocate for change, only because, hallmark of exercise is that if you keep doing the same thing, you just sort of, you get better and better and better at it, then the effects of doing the same thing begin to diminish in terms of benefits. So you should change it. You should challenge yourself. There should be something that's sort of progressive, and you either do heavier or more, but to only to a certain point. And how much time do you have, how much recovery do you have, and everything. So I'm a fan of changing things. I don't think it needs to change every week, maybe even every month, but it should change. And part of what I enjoy about my exercise or physical activity routine is doing something that's a little different, just to keep myself mentally fresh, as opposed to doing the same thing. But I have friends and colleagues who, this is their exercise routine, and they enjoy the routine of routine. So, I don't want to say, thou shalt not do this, but I enjoy change. I think change for most people is generally good, but it's not necessarily required. Just remember, most people do nothing, right? So if you're doing something, something is so much better than nothing. And then, the what of the something is that's the sort of, the small maneuvering inside the box.
Free weights or machines?
Either doesn't matter.
Either.
Your body doesn't know whether you're lifting a free weight or a machine, whatever is your preference or you have access to.
Well, so this kind of comes into my last question as well,
Sure.
which is the importance of mimicking real life motions when you're training. But for me, that's why I prefer free weights because they're
Yeah.
giving the side, like the balancing muscles.
Right.
I, and
Yeah,
and
I mean, there was a big push in the US NIH around what they call functional training. And so, by their definition of functional, it was activities that fit into things that made, activities in your daily life better or easier. And I have no problem with doing that. But I do think that we have to realize is that any sort of generic strength training will have a spillover effect into function in lots of different areas. The free weights, and I use free weights, just confession, work great. And I think that they are something that, have a little bit better translation into daily activities. So if you want to push something over your head, you can still use a machine, but if it's a piece of equipment, and then free weights mimic the piece or the suitcase or whatever it is better than does a machine. So I have no issues really. I think the differences in some of those things are subtle, unless there's a specific daily activity that you have that is like, and for the benefit of our Scandinavian friends, I cross country ski. Then by all means, you should practice that because that's a pretty unique maneuver. But yeah, I agree for the most part.
okay, yeah, I think about Dr. Peter Attia and his was it centenarian Olympics. It's like, what is it you want to
Yeah,
do when you get
sure.
old?
Yeah,
Um, and it's day to day things and like
absolutely.
lifting things into cupboards and stuff like that.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, Dr. Phillips, thank you so much for joining us. So, where can people follow your work and see more of what you're working on?
Yeah, I'm MACKINPROF, Prof, Master Kinesiology Professor, on X, Instagram. I am on TikTok. I'm really on there just to upset my 23-year-old son who says old people shouldn't be on TikTok. And I'm on Facebook as well as LinkedIn. So you can find me. I'm easy to find in my affiliation with McMaster University as well. So give me a follow.
Excellent. I will link to those in the description. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. That was really
You're,
interesting.
you're very welcome, Richard. My pleasure.